And I'm also the director of the Central Oregon Psychedelic Society. Now, we are here today to talk about hallucinogenic mushrooms and Christianity. So, to start us off, I'd like to give a little brief history about a person named John Marco Allegro. So John Allegro was an English archaeologist and philologist of the 20th century. He was born in 1923 and served in the Royal Navy during World War II, and after he finished his military career, continued on to college. He studied at Manchester University and then Oxford, and by 1952 had a master's degree, but continued studying Greek and Hebrew to add to his linguistic utility belt, if you will. Then, in 1953, he was invited to work on a team of international scholars deciphering the Dead Sea Scrolls. So he went to Jerusalem and spent a year there working on deciphering the Dead Sea Scrolls before heading back to Manchester, where he continued as a lecturer in comparative Semitic philology. Now, during his time as a faculty member at Manchester University, he began to write his most infamous book, Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, which was first published in 1970. So this book uses his work on the Dead Sea Scrolls as a basis for his hypothesis that Christianity as we know it today originated as a series of Judaic fertility cults. And furthermore, that the figure Jesus Christ of the New Testament was not actually a person who existed historically, but was in fact an allegory or a coded reference to the entheogenic use of the hallucinogenic mushroom, the Amanita muscaria. So, Allegro was the only non-Christian among the original translators of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and from the very beginning of his career had a bit of pushback in this field of study, and he received much unwarranted criticism and accusations from colleagues, deeming his translations too straightforward, simplistic, and just riddled with conjecture and misleading misinterpretations. To which he responded with a call for evidence-based critical analysis of theology, specifically an interdisciplinary approach. Even so, it was ultimately the sacred mushroom and the cross that ruined his career. But this is exactly why we're here today, to learn and discuss this matter in an interdisciplinary fashion as it was originally meant to be interpreted, and not just by a small sect of theologians. In Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, Allegro hypothesizes that the parables and stories of early Christianity originated from an Essene order that ingested hallucinogenic mushrooms. He postulates that the New Testament is just a collection of stories depicting such use of these substances, and that they are written in an esoteric fashion to hide the truth about Christ. That truth, Allegro believes, is that Christ was a mushroom. Yeah. He believed that the Essene ways were the pinnacle of modern Christian philosophy, as when you look at it retrospectively, one could say that compared to the other two major sects of Judaic philosophy at the time, the Essenes most closely represented that which we think of today as Christ-like. They were said to be more ascetic, or live an ascetic lifestyle, and there we go. And their ideals were not only reflective of ascetic lifestyles, but also were located outside of the social norms that were accepted by the other two sects, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Now, Allegro believed that there were too many correlations between the Dead Sea Scrolls and Christianity to ignore. This is something that I agree with entirely. He believes that this is a problem. He believed that it was a problem of etymology, and he used his linguistic knowledge to try and use Sumerian as a basis, as a root language, to further decipher the Hebrew and Greek in ancient Christian texts. He also thought that we, as humankind, could learn a great deal about the interdisciplinary research and approach to this type of study so that we could learn more about the Abrahamic traditions. He went on to compare the scrolls in the New Testament to arrive to this conclusion that many religions, including Christianity, but not only Christianity, can be found to have roots in such cultist rituals as ingesting hallucinogenic compounds to elicit divine theophany. So, basically, Allegro felt that the Amanita muscaria was the physical representation of a metaphorical Jesus Christ. And scholars, theologians, and evangelicals alike have criticized his work. Even Gordon Wasson, who was an amateur mycologist at the time of the Sacred Cross's publication, had written some criticism about this, saying that Allegro would have done well to consult an art historian on the matter. So, the idea of Allegro's is that as primal beliefs evolved into archaic religions and then historic religions, you can use the study of the languages and how they evolve over time in correlation with how the religions evolve, and you can note that the language becomes more esoteric over time. Since fertility was central to his argument, as the phallus looks a lot like a mushroom, he attributes this kind of coding to the fertility cults, such as the Essenes. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Allegro thought that the ingestion of the sacrament that Christians readily partake of was originally a hallucinogenic plant or mushroom, and that the act of ritually ingesting the psychoactive substance to elicit divine theophany is not only the origin of Christianity, but many religions as well. Allegro continues on, however, to advocate for a grand conspiracy of the Christian church to suppress such esoteric knowledge through, to suppress this ancient knowledge through esotericism as a motion to preserve the myth of Christianity, which is that Christ was not a man, but indeed a metaphor for a psychoactive mushroom that could produce religious theophany. Now, Allegro was no mycologist and he was no ethnobotanist, but fortunately, despite many discrepancies in his original hypothesis, he called for interdisciplinary work on the subject, and many researchers have done follow-up work, including Jerry and Julie Brown. Terence McKenna was another person. He further postulated that the psilocybin cadenzi was a better candidate than the Amanita muscaria. So, all right. Now, whatever it is, Allegro knew that people were eating something that would elicit divine theophany. And he came to the conclusion that it was Amanita muscaria, or the fly agaric. And here to talk about the potential rights, wrongs, and all of the unknowns are Dr. Jerry Brown and Tom Hatsis. Now first, like to say a few things about them. Jerry Brown, PhD, is an anthropologist, author, and activist. From 1972 to 2014, he served as founding professor of anthropology at the Florida International University in Miami. And he taught and designed a course on hallucinogens and culture. This course examines the use of psychoactive plants by tribal and classical cultures, including ancient India and Greece, and by modern mind explorers, the psychonauts of the 20th century. Dr. Brown is co-author of the Psychedelic Gospels, The Secret History of Hallucinogens in Christianity, and also co-author of Sacred Plants and the Gnostic Church, Speculations on Entheogen Use in Early Christian Ritual, the Journal of Ancient History in May 2014. Now, Tom Hatsis is an historian and author of The Witch's Ointment. He's the director of Sanctum Psychedelia, a roller derby fanatic, one of the directors of Sanctum Psychedelia, one of many roller derby fanatics, and is currently awaiting the much anticipated release of his new book, The Psychedelic Mysteries, which is due out September 2018, in which he discusses many of the mysteries, including those that Allegro and so many others have tried to decipher throughout our time. So now, without further ado, here are Jerry Brown and Tom Hatsis. Please.
Hello. Hi. Thank you, Amanda, for that excellent introduction.